You know that feeling of comfort you get when you look at a full pantry? Neat rows of canned beans, meats, veggies, everything stacked tight, looking rock solid. It's the one part of prepping most people never question. But here's the twist. Sometimes the danger is sitting right there on the shelf. So here's the real question. Could your well-stocked pantry actually be the first thing to fail when you need it most? Because today, we're breaking down the 5 most common mistakes almost every budget prepper makes with canned foods. Mistakes that waste money, destroy shelf life, and quietly chip away at your food security. And the best part? Every single one of these mistakes is easy to avoid, and fixing them doesn't cost you a dime more than you're already spending. Stay with me, your pantry might depend on it. Mistake number 1, buying on a budget. When most people start building a prepper pantry, the first instinct is simple. Stretch every rupee, every dollar, every pound as far as it will go. And on the surface, canned food looks like the perfect solution. It's cheap, it's everywhere, and it feels bomb-proof. You walk into a supermarket, load up your cart with the lowest priced cans on the shelf, and walk out thinking you've made a smart, frugal prepping move. But here's the uncomfortable truth. The cheapest cans are often the least reliable ones you could put into long-term storage, and most budget preppers don't realize the danger until it's too late. When manufacturers push prices lower, something has to give. And what usually gets sacrificed isn't the food inside, it's the structure that's supposed to protect it. The metal becomes thinner, the seams become weaker, the lid feels almost flexible when you press it. The lining inside the can is sometimes applied unevenly or in a thinner coat. These aren't flaws you notice at checkout. They're flaws that reveal themselves slowly, quietly, and sometimes invisibly until you find a can in your pantry that's rusting at the seam or bulging like it's holding its breath. Cheap cans often rely on low-cost sealing processes that simply aren't built for the kind of storage preppers expect. A high-quality can has solid, clean seam crimps, consistent pressure around the rim, and a lid that stays rigid even after years of sitting undisturbed. A budget can, on the other hand, may have tiny imperfections that don't matter for short-term household use, like a slightly uneven double seam, a micro gap where moisture and oxygen can sneak inside, or a weld that looks fine but weakens faster under humidity. The problem is subtle. The consequences are not. This isn't an exaggeration. The highest risk can failures almost always happen in low-cost cans with thin walls or poor seam quality. The metal corrodes faster because there simply isn't much metal there to begin with. Temperature swings stress those weak seams. A humid environment accelerates corrosion. And because most prepper pantries aren't climate-controlled bunkers, cheap cans degrade far faster than people expect. Even worse, food spoilage inside a compromised can doesn't always announce itself dramatically. Some cans don't bloat, they don't leak, they don't rust visibly, they just quietly lose their vacuum seal. The food inside begins breaking down, sometimes in subtle ways you won't smell or see until you open it. One bad can means food poisoning at the worst possible moment, and all of it starts with the decision to save a few bucks at the checkout counter. So, what does the smarter prepper do? The answer isn't buying gourmet canned food or spending double on every item. It's simply choosing structurally sound cans from reputable brands and paying attention to build quality, not just the price tag. A well-made can has heft. The lid doesn't flex when you press down. The seams look clean and uniform without wrinkles or thin spots. The metal feels thicker, more rigid, less tinny. These cans tend to have better corrosion resistance and better internal lining, both critical for long-term storage. The difference in price is usually tiny, sometimes just a few cents more per can, but the difference in reliability is massive. High-quality cans withstand temperature variation better. They resist rust longer. Their seams maintain integrity for years. And when you're counting on those cans to feed your family during an emergency, reliability matters more than shaving a few pennies off your food bill. Another smart habit is to test the brands you intend to stock long-term. Buy a few cans, store them for 6 months in typical pantry conditions, and inspect them. Look for any early rust, any seam deformation, any change in shape. You'll quickly see which brands hold up and which ones cut corners. Once you find a reliable brand, you can buy confidently without worrying about hidden weaknesses. In the end, the mistake isn't buying on a budget, it's assuming all cans are created equal. They're not. Cans are only as strong as the metal and engineering behind them, and cheap construction always shows its cracks, sometimes literally. Spending slightly more for stronger cans means your prepper pantry actually fulfills its purpose, staying safe, stable, and edible for years. Mistake number 2, storing without environmental control. One of the biggest misunderstandings in the prepper world is the idea that canned food is invincible. People see that metal shell, feel the solid weight, and assume it can survive anything: heat, cold, moisture, poor placement, even neglect. And because of that belief, most budget preppers do something that quietly ruins their entire stockpile. They store cans anywhere they happen to fit. A hot attic, a damp basement, a kitchen cabinet near the stove, a garage that turns into an oven in summer. It all feels convenient, but convenience is exactly what shortens the life of your food. Canned food isn't fragile, but it isn't immortal either. Every can has enemies, and they're all environmental. Heat, humidity, and sunlight don't just sit passively around your pantry. They actively attack the metal and the food inside. Store your cans in the wrong place, and you've taken what should be one of the most stable forms of long-term food and turned it into a ticking countdown. Let's break down the biggest culprit first: heat. Most homes have temperature swings that don't seem dramatic to you, but mean everything to the chemistry inside a can. A stable, cool environment slows chemical reactions. A hot one accelerates them. Every 10 degrees Celsius increase in storage temperature dramatically speeds up the rate at which food quality declines. That means a can stored at 30 degrees Celsius doesn't last nearly as long as the same can stored at 18 degrees Celsius. And remember, many garages, sheds, and top-floor closets reach 40 degrees Celsius or higher in the summer. Even if the can doesn't bulge or leak, the food ages faster, becomes mushy, loses nutrients, and breaks down internally long before the expiration date. Now add humidity to the mix. Metal reacts to moisture, always. The seams at the top and bottom of a can are especially vulnerable. They're not solid plates of steel. They're folded, layered, and crimped sections designed to be airtight, but not designed to resist long-term exposure to moisture. High humidity doesn't need to condense into visible droplets. Moist air alone is enough to start corrosion. Rust begins microscopically before it ever becomes visible. By the time you see a reddish patch at the bottom rim of a can, the oxidative process has already been happening for months or even years. And then there's the basement, a classic favorite among preppers. Basements feel cool, and that makes them seem perfect. But a cool room filled with damp air is worse than a warm room with dry air. Cans sitting on cold concrete floors become moisture magnets. The temperature difference between the can and the floor encourages condensation, especially during seasonal temperature shifts. That tiny film of moisture, repeated again and again, accelerates corrosion at the seams faster than most preppers realize. Many canned foods lost to mysterious leaks are actually victims of basement humidity. Sunlight is another quiet destroyer. Most people don't think twice about storing cans on open shelving near a window or leaving a few grocery bags in the trunk of their car. But direct light heats cans internally and externally. UV exposure also degrades labels, making it harder to identify expiration dates, ingredients, or potential problem cans later on. While sunlight doesn't damage the metal directly, the heat from repeated exposure shortens shelf life the same way a hot garage does. When you combine heat, humidity, and light, you get the worst-case scenario: a pantry that looks organized but is slowly ruining itself. This is why so many preppers pull out cans after 5 or 6 years and find rust rings, softened seams, swollen tops, or contents that have drastically declined in quality. To them, it seems random, but it isn't random at all. It's environmental stress. Here's the important part. Environmental control doesn't have to be expensive. You don't need a bunker. You don't need climate control systems. You just need consistency. Start by designating a proper storage zone. Ideally, you're looking for a space that stays cool year-round, somewhere in the range of 10 to 18 degrees Celsius. A closet in the center of your home, an interior room, or a shaded area away from exterior walls often works well. The key is avoiding the extreme swings that come with attics, garages, basements, and sheds. If humidity is an issue, and it is for most households, fix it early. Use desiccants, keep cans off concrete floors, and avoid stacking them directly against exterior walls. Shelves with airflow underneath allow moisture to escape and prevent long-term condensation buildup. In high humidity regions, even a small dehumidifier or basic ventilation can make a huge difference. If you live somewhere prone to flooding or seasonal water intrusion, waterproof bins become non-negotiable. Not only do they protect against direct water contact, they also protect labels from peeling off, which is critical for rotating stock and identifying problem cans. Choose bins with tight lids, but avoid sealing them shut with no airflow if your climate is humid. You want moisture blocked, not trapped. For sunlight control, blackout curtains, closed doors, and simple shade do more than enough. Keep cans stored away from windows entirely if you can. Light exposure is easy to control once you think about it. Most people just never think about it at all. Mistake number 3, buying too much variety, too many exotic items. A lot of new preppers fall into a trap that doesn't feel like a mistake at all when it's happening. In fact, it feels smart, it feels thorough, it feels creative. They walk down the canned food aisle or browse online deals and think, let me get a little bit of everything. More variety means more options. Before they know it, their pantry is filled with canned curry blends, odd vegetables no one in the house actually eats, sauces they've never tried, canned meals with 10 ingredients they can't even pronounce, and items they bought because they looked interesting in the moment. It's a kind of survival shopping enthusiasm, a sense that more flavors, more novelty, and more uniqueness automatically equals better preparation. But here's the hard truth. Prepping isn't about entertainment. It's not about building a culinary museum. It's about calories, nutrition, predictability, and usability under stress. Too much variety, especially too many exotic or unfamiliar items, creates a pantry that looks full but doesn't actually perform. Instead of a stable foundation of reliable foods that everyone knows how to cook and will definitely eat, you end up with a mismatched collection of cans that don't work together, don't stack nutritionally, and don't support long-term survival. When a crisis hits, the last thing you want is confusion, and that's exactly what a chaotic, novelty-heavy pantry creates. Think about it practically. During an emergency, routines are disrupted. Stress is high. You're not flipping through cookbooks or experimenting with new meal ideas. You're trying to create simple, dependable meals that provide energy, comfort, and efficiency. That canned octopus or imported lentil stew mixed with spices you've never used might be interesting on a normal day, but when the power is out and you're rationing water and fuel, it becomes a question mark. Meanwhile, the basics like canned chicken, plain beans, vegetables, soups, and pasta sauce are the items that deliver consistency without effort. Another problem with buying too much variety is storage efficiency. Pantries have limits. Every inch taken by something exotic is an inch not taken by a staple that could serve you again and again. Staples stack easily, cook predictably, and combine well with each other. Exotic items, especially bulky canned meals or odd-sized cans, often don't stack well, don't complement other foods, and can't be stretched into multiple meals. You might open one for dinner and find yourself stuck with leftovers nobody wants, or worse, you open it on a bad day and discover no one in the family will eat it at all. Then there's the issue of caloric efficiency. Many novelty canned foods are low in actual calorie value because they focus on flavor rather than fuel. A gourmet canned curry might taste great, but it may only offer a fraction of the calories that a simple can of beans or chili provides. Foods that don't pull their weight compromise your endurance and your planning. And let's not forget morale. Yes, having flavors and comfort foods helps during difficult times, but morale doesn't come from novelty. It comes from familiarity. People take comfort in meals they recognize. A bowl of rice with seasoned vegetables, a simple bean stew, or a pasta and protein combination creates a sense of stability when everything else feels uncertain. Exotic foods rarely provide that kind of grounding comfort. In fact, unfamiliar flavors or textures can make stress worse because people already overwhelmed by the situation now have to deal with a meal they're unsure about. But the biggest flaw with the variety overload mindset is that it tricks preppers into thinking they're prepared when they aren't. A pantry full of odd items creates the illusion of abundance without offering real nutritional balance or meal-building potential. It becomes a museum of interesting cans instead of a functioning survival system. The fix is simple, and it doesn't require spending more, just spending smarter. Build the foundation first. Start with canned proteins like chicken, tuna, beef, and sardines. Add beans, vegetables, fruits, soups, tomato sauce, pasta sauce, and basic carbs like rice or pasta. These items give you complete, flexible meal options. Once your core is solid, then add a few novelty items, not the other way around. Mistake number 4. No rotation, no records. There's a certain kind of confidence people get when they stack a few dozen canned goods into a cupboard and slam the door shut. It feels like security, like preparedness, like a box checked on the survival to-do list. And honestly, that's why this mistake is so common, because it feels responsible. It feels smart. You look at those neatly lined cans and think, well, there we go, emergency food handled. But what usually happens next? Nothing. Those cans sit there untouched, unmonitored, and unrotated. Days turn into weeks, weeks into months, and months quietly stretch into years. Before you know it, you've essentially created a canned food museum exhibit instead of an emergency pantry you can actually rely on. People fall into the store and forget trap because canned food has that reputation for lasting forever. And yes, canned food is incredibly durable. It's one of the safest, longest-lasting forms of food preservation ever invented. But it isn't invincible. It isn't eternal. A can on paper might have a shelf life of 10, 20, even 30 years under ideal conditions. But ideal conditions rarely exist in the real world, and that's where preppers often get blindsided. Maybe humidity creeps into a room over a few summers, maybe a basement floods ever so slightly one year, and a few cans end up with rust creeping under the label. Maybe you had a box of canned goods that got shoved behind something else and forgotten because life got busy and you meant to reorganize later. Or maybe a helpful friend or family member put groceries away for you one day and suddenly the newest cans ended up at the front while the older ones got pushed to the back. It doesn't take a dramatic disaster for canned food to quietly degrade. It only takes neglect. And then there's the issue of labels. It's almost funny how something so small can cause such chaos. A label gets a little damp, the adhesive weakens, and suddenly it's peeling off. One day you're staring at a mysterious blank metal cylinder trying to guess whether it's peaches, beans, or cat food. Without clear labeling or dates, you can't rotate properly and you can't plan meals. So that can either gets thrown away or it becomes part of the I'll deal with it later pile, which is exactly how people end up wasting food they thought would last indefinitely. This is the irony. People buy canned goods to avoid waste, yet without some kind of tracking or rotation system, they waste more than they realize. They end up with expired or questionable items. When an emergency hits, you don't want hesitation or doubt. You don't want to hold up a swollen can and think, maybe this is still fine? You want certainty. You want to know the food you stored is safe, nutritious, and ready to use. If your canned goods are a gamble, then your entire prepper strategy is built on sand. What makes this mistake even more avoidable is that rotation isn't complicated and it doesn't have to be time-consuming. You don't need spreadsheets or military-level inventory management. You just need a habit. Every time you buy new canned goods, the older ones move forward and the newer ones move back. Every time you put a can away, you take 10 seconds to write the date on the lid with a big, bold marker. Every now and then, you give your storage area a quick glance. You check if anything looks damaged, rusted, bulging, or suspicious. You notice if a label is falling off and rewrite the name directly onto the metal. You make sure nothing is living at the back of the shelf longer than it should. This small level of attention transforms your canned goods from a passive stockpile into an active food system. And the beautiful thing about an active system is that you're always familiar with it. You know what you have, how long you've had it, and what you need to replenish. You aren't surprised by expired food or missing staples. You don't suddenly realize that all your proteins are 5 years old while all your vegetables are brand new. Everything stays balanced and dependable because you're regularly engaging with it, even at the smallest level. Mistake number 5, relying solely on cans. People like to imagine that cans are eternal, but the reality is that they are durable only under the right conditions. And that means if anything goes wrong with your storage environment, your rotation system, or even the cans themselves, you suddenly lose what you believed was your strongest backup. Even the supply chain isn't guaranteed. When disasters happen, canned goods disappear from shelves faster than almost any other pantry item. If your entire prepping plan depends on grabbing cans on sale or restocking at the last minute, you've already built a house of cards. One shake in the system, and the entire foundation collapses. This is where many budget preppers unintentionally trap themselves. They think, I've got cans, so I'm covered, and move on to other things. They don't build layers, they don't build redundancy, they don't create backup options. They rely on the idea that canned food equals guaranteed survival. If your cans fail, what do you eat? If a flood hits your basement and rust takes hold, what then? If rodents chew through cardboard flats and knock cans over, denting them or causing microscopic seal damage, are you prepared for that? And what happens if you get into a situation where cooking is necessary, but you don't have the heat, fuel, or tools to make canned food usable, most people never consider how many invisible weak points actually exist in a can-dependent pantry until it's too late. That's why redundancy is the heart of real prepping. A layered pantry doesn't just protect you, it gives you flexibility, options, and breathing room. Dried foods, for example, are incredibly powerful. Rice, lentils, chickpeas, grains, oats, pasta, they last for years with minimal effort. They store compactly, they provide massive calories for low cost, and unlike cans, they don't dent, rust, warp, or rely on sealed metal to stay safe. Even if the packaging gets damaged, the food inside can often be salvaged and restored in airtight containers. Then there are the heavy hitters of preservation basics: salt, sugar, honey. These aren't just ingredients, they're tools. Salt lets you cure meat and vegetables. Sugar lets you preserve fruits. Honey lasts essentially forever and doubles as medicine. With these, you can extend the life of fresh food, keep calories coming, and create stability even in unstable situations. People forget that during crises, fresh food becomes unpredictable. But with basic preservation supplies, you can turn unpredictable into practical. And what about cooking? If you're relying on cans, you might think cooking isn't a big concern. After all, most canned foods can be eaten cold, but your long-term backups, aka your grains, beans, legumes, need heat. They need boiling water. They need time. If you haven't planned for that, your backup food might as well be decorative gravel. A prepper with 200 pounds of rice but no way to boil water is in worse shape than someone with nothing but a week's worth of ramen and a small gas stove. This is why every layered pantry needs a heat source: a small butane stove, a rocket stove, a solar cooker, even a fire-safe outdoor setup. If you can boil water, you can survive. If you can't, you're one broken can opener away from trouble. A truly resilient prepper understands one thing above all: survival is about options. When you rely solely on one category, you strip away your options and depend on luck. And luck is never a strategy. Yes, cans are fantastic. They're reliable, affordable, and essential. But they're only one piece of the puzzle. When you treat them as the only piece, they become a liability. When you treat them as part of a broader, smarter system, they become a strength. And that's the entire goal of prepping. Not just to store food, but to build resilience in every form. So at this point, you've seen how easily even well-intentioned preppers fall into these 5 traps: buying cheap, storing carelessly, chasing variety instead of value, forgetting rotation, and depending too heavily on cans alone. None of these mistakes come from laziness. They come from comfort. Cans feel safe. They feel done. But real preparedness lives in the details: the way you store, the way you plan, the way you keep your pantry working for you instead of silently degrading behind closed doors. Before you click away, take a second to think about your own setup. Did you recognize any of these mistakes in your pantry? Whatever you found, share it in the comments. Not just what went wrong, but what you're going to do to fix it. Your experience might be exactly what another prepper needs to hear. And if you want more practical, budget-friendly prepping advice, make sure you subscribe.